Hello, everyone. Hoping you're all made it here, and those of you that are viewing have your power back. We've had some issues here in Monterey Carmel with our power due to the storm. So I want to thank everyone for being at today's webinar. This webinar launches the AIA Monterey Bay's Committee on the Environment 2023 lecture series on healthy materials. Today's webinar will count towards 1.0 HSUs. If you put your AIA number in the registration, it will be reported. 2030 commitment and how to put together your firm's sustainability action plan. If you missed those, they are on our website for viewing, and I'll post a link in the chat. We're pleased to have two speakers today, Sara Tepfer and Lona Rerick. Sara Tepfer is a senior consultant in the Sustainability, Climate Resilience, and Environmental Group at Arup, where she specializes in healthy materials, human health and well-being in the built environment, and low-energy building design. She additionally has knowledge and experience in green building rating systems, including LEED, WELL, the Living Building Challenge, and Fitwell. Before starting in this role, Sara held several research positions, fellowships, and internships in building science, architecture, chemistry, and public health, while working towards graduate degrees in architecture and building sciences, a variety of commercial, mixed use, and residential projects. In each of her projects, Sara is passionate about helping teams identify and implement practical pathways to achieve ambitious sustainability goals. Lona Rerick is an architect and sustainable materials leader at ZGF Architects in Portland, Oregon. Lona guides clients, design teams, and contractors through the intricacies of system material selection, product research for locations, and writing specifications to assure that project goals are met during construction. Lona Rerick leads ZGF Architects project performance teams on the important transformation to building materials selection using transparency tools like EPDs, health product declarations, declare labels, and living product challenge certifications. Material selection is one of the most difficult sustainable goals to track and integrate into the design and delivery process. As architects and designers, we are bombarded with innumerable material options, resources for analyzing those options, not to mention benchmarks from multiple green rating systems. How do we properly analyze the green and healthy building products promoted by nearly every company out there? That challenge has been embraced by the AIA Materials Pledge and the Prescription for Healthier Building Materials, two AIA programs, each of which Lona and Sara were developers of. Lona was instrumental at developing the Architecture and Design Materials Pledge, whose mission is to inspire architects to shift the way in which we evaluate products and finishes that we specify daily across 5 topics, which Lona will get into. We will also be talking about how the Healthier Materials Protocol, which Sara and a team at Arup developed, which guides owners, design professionals, contractors, and facility managers towards best practices for choosing and installing products that are healthier over their full life cycle for humans and the environment. It also asks us to, the protocol can be used as a tool in conjunction with the pledge. Here I've posted our learning objectives. I will provide web links in these programs in the chat. During the presentation, please put questions in the Q&A and any comments in the chat, and we'll try to answer all of your questions. If we go past 1, we'll stay over a few minutes to answer any last-minute questions. Both the slide deck and recording of the site in a week or so. I will now pass the presentation over to Lona.
Thank you, Libby. I hope everybody catches what I say. It sounds like you guys are having some electricity and internet issues down there. So can you just confirm that you can hear me? Yep, thank you. And I'm going to share my screen. Right, can you see the slides? Perfect. All right, so this is one of my favorite topics. I'm going to talk about the AIA Materials Pledge, or the longer version of the name is Architects and Designers Materials Pledge, or I like to just call it the Materials Pledge. We'll get into a little bit about what it is and how you can actually just start implementing it in your practice. And I do want to caveat everything by saying that we are all on a journey in choosing more sustainable materials. The industry at large is on a journey in providing us more information and providing us better products. We can't do everything all at once, but I would also like to make the point that materials are part of what we do as designers. Anyway, we're always doing research, we're always diving into different attributes of materials. This is layering on new and different kinds of information, but this is in our wheelhouse. This is something that we can control and that we have influence over, but you don't have to do everything in every single project. You can build on experience from project to project and keep getting better at this. And my slide doesn't want to advance, so that's not so good. I guess I will have to do it this way. So what is the Materials Pledge? I had the pleasure in 2015 of joining what is called the AIA Materials Knowledge Working Group at the time. And what we were looking at that point is, in design, as architects and interior designers, we do something kind of unique as artists. We take a lot of other people's products and we make something new out of them. And we work with all these materials, and they can just be very evocative and beautiful things. And we're creating these designs that people will experience. But all of these materials have impacts. This is a kind of melodramatic, version of what some of those impacts might be. But this is all based in some reality. The materials that we're choosing may look beautiful in our projects, but they may have impacts that we're not intending their way outside of our projects. So the Materials Pledge, when we created it in 2018, was based on the 2030 challenge and the 2030 commitment. And I hear you guys had a whole year on this last year, so this should be a pretty familiar refresher. But the 2030 challenge, when it came out, was just an aspiration. It was like, just keep reducing your energy use of your buildings to where you get down to net zero by 2030. And I remember at the time, I'm old enough to remember at the time, that a lot of us went on to Architecture 2030's website and we signed on and we felt very good about ourselves, but that didn't mean that we were doing anything at all about that. And the Architecture 2030, realized that this was happening and worked with AIA to create the AIA 2030 commitment. And what's wonderful about the AIA 2030 commitment is it takes those aspirations and applies some metrics and reporting to it. So that was always the idea with the Materials Pledge, is that we would first put out some aspirations, which we did in 2018, and then we would get to AIA overseeing some metrics and reporting against those aspirations. AIA has just convened this year a Materials Pledge working group. So that's what the group is going to be working on this year, is what does reporting look like? It's going to look a lot different than 2030 commitment reporting, mostly because there are 5 concepts and it's just a lot more complicated. So it'll be a little bit more of a choose your own adventure into how you report it. But let's get a little bit more into what is the pledge. So the pledge is these 5 aspirational statements in these 5 categories, knowing that there's no perfect building material. If we had a perfect building material, what would it be comprised of? And that perfect building material would support human health, climate health, ecosystem health, and social health and equity in the circular economy. So these 5 concepts are, at different levels of traction in the industry right now. the first two on this list, human health, knowing the ingredients that are in your building products and the unintended consequences of some of the most hazardous of those ingredients, that has been around as a concept for a while now. And there's quite a few documents like health product declarations and declare labels where you can actually see the ingredients in products and start to assess and start to choose safer material options. And climate health, of course, with embodied carbon has a lot of momentum right now. I think you guys are experiencing a little bit of that today. So the weather events that we've been having over the last few years make it pretty hard to avoid the impacts of climate change that are already hitting us. Some of these other areas, social health and equity and ecosystem health and circularity, they're starting to gain a little bit of traction in the marketplace at large, but I would say that they're behind these first two. If you want to learn more about the Materials Pledge and get some ideas about good starting points, the AIA does have a web landing page, which I think Libby's going to throw in the chat for you guys. It, of course, restates the aspirational statements, but it also has some really great information about places you can start, both in educating yourself and really asking for better materials. Where do you go with that? And I'm excited to say that there are over 200 signatory companies at this point and growing all the time. I remember when we first launched it just in a letter in 2019, there were, I think, only about 50, and that felt pretty good at the time. So it's great to see the growth in it. And it'll be even more exciting when we start getting to reporting and we start making progress as an industry. So that's all great. You know, those are beautiful aspirational statements, but what do we actually do with them? And that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. I think if a lot of you probably have sustainability action plans as part of your 2030 commitment, that's one of the first things you do when you sign up for the 2030 commitment is to create your sustainability action plan. So I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to include materials in that sustainability action plan. Or if you don't have one of those, you could just create a materials action plan instead. And these are some 4 basic things that I would suggest that you might want to include in that. The first is asking for transparency. Transparency is a kind of funny term that we throw around a lot in the sustainable building materials world, but it's really just the basic foundational information that we need. So for human health, we need to know the ingredients that are actually in products. So we need that transparency before we can even start to screen against the most hazardous of those ingredients. For climate health or embodied carbon, we need environmental product declarations that tell us what is the embodied carbon in that product. So, and we're seeing more of these kinds of transparency documents, some of which aren't even fully created yet in the 3 other areas of the Materials Pledge. So asking for that information is just fundamental to doing the next part of the work. Obviously, setting some goals and metrics. How are you going to, as a design firm, know that you're making progress? What are your goals? What are you going to tackle first? You don't need to tackle everything. Maybe you just want to start with embodied carbon. Maybe you just want to start with getting the most hazardous ingredients out of your interior products. So that will be specific to your firm, but just starting to set those goals is important. You'll also want to create in-house tools. Maybe this means greening your specifications. This might mean greening your materials library. You might just start with finding the best resources that you can share with your staff. And of course, the last important piece is education, educating yourself, educating your colleagues, and so that you guys start to know the language and start to know the key concepts of things that you can start looking for. So then these next 5 slides are taking each of the 5 categories of the Materials Pledge and giving some top 3 places where you can start looking for making change. You'll see some recurring things in all of these. The transparency is the first one for human health. We need to know the material ingredients that are in those products. Health product declarations are arguably the best source of that information. The Health Product Declaration Collaborative has been working really hard to set the ground rules for the industry about how material ingredients are reported for building products. There are starting to be third-party verified versions of those. So when you see those are preferable to the ones that are self-declared, although I would have to admit that most of them are still self-declared. So once you have that material ingredients disclosure, you can start to look to avoid certain known chemicals of concern. The two lists of chemicals of concern that probably have the most traction within the industry at the moment are Green Science Policy Institute's 6 classes, or you probably have heard of the Living Building Challenge Red List. Of course, the fewer ingredients, this is the same thing they tell everybody. I always compare this stuff to the food industry. If I can't pronounce an ingredient in it, I probably don't want it in my food, and I probably don't want it in my building product. So local natural materials have, wood, its ingredient is just wood. Unless, of course, you want to go to the chemical molecular level. But that's a lot easier to understand and a lot easier to screen for human health. So with climate health, again, asking for transparency. In this case, the transparency is environmental product declarations. Once you have that basic transparency, you start to look for lower embodied carbon materials. We could do a whole hour on this topic or whole summits, but looking for low embodied carbon, I would look to the Carbon Leadership Forum. They have baseline documents for certain types of products that have a lot of traction in the industry. And again, those natural bio-based materials are a good place to, a good shortcut material to go to, even if you don't have the first two. Plants do this wonderful thing. They sequester carbon through photosynthesis, so they actually are carbon negative and can be locked into a building through their use in building projects. Social health and equity is an area that's just starting to gain some traction. Although I have some friends that are doing a lot of work on this. Grace Farms with the Design for Freedom toolkit is something to check out. But they will tell you, they think that the building product industry is probably only one big expose away from its reckoning. So we should all start thinking about this and start asking about this. This first statement, asking about slavery and labor practices, asking if the company understands whether there's slavery in their supply chain. This is a new question for companies. A lot of companies are going to, maybe product reps will look at you quizzically when you ask this, but it's really important stuff. It's kind of where we were 10 years ago with asking what ingredients were in building products, where we haven't been asking, but it's a really important question to ask. And once we start asking, then the manufacturers will start looking down their supply chain and hopefully taking action on any problems that they see within those supply chains. Of course, avoiding known chemicals of concern is not only a good thing to do for the users of the building, but it's also a good thing to do because of supply chain issues around it. The highly processed chemical ingredients, especially the petrochemical ingredients that are in a lot of our building products, have huge consequences for the communities that live near their manufacturing facilities. Again, you can take the shortcut and you can prefer some local reclaimed natural materials, and those could also have social equity benefits. For ecosystem health, I think this is funny because this is where we started a lot of this work, early lead stuff, looking at FSC wood. In some ways, we haven't made that much progress on this, but I expect that in the next few years that we'll make more progress on it. So asking for FSC wood, but also asking manufacturers about how their products manufacture affect the ecosystem is a good place to start. Again, choosing materials that are natural, low impact, and regenerative is a place to start getting to better products. And last but not least, and this one's starting to have a lot of great conversations about it, as we're dealing with climate change, I think we're also starting to deal with the fact that
let me share my screen. There we go. Do you see my screen? All right. So I'm going to follow up along with Lona's presentation, or part of her presentation, with an introduction and a walk through some practical applications of the Healthier Materials Protocol. So kind of putting the protocol in context, Lona presented the 5 elements within the AIA Pledge, and the human health is one of those elements, as Lona discussed, and the AIA Healthier Materials Protocol is really focusing on that human health element and thinking about healthier materials specifically. So the protocol itself was a collaboration through the Building Health Initiative, which started through the USGBC Northern California chapter. And the leadership of that group really wanted the BHI to have a tangible outcome. So Francis Yang, who leads our sustainable materials team here at Arup, presented the idea of creating a guidebook and a framework that could kind of bring some clarity to the Wild West that was evolving at that time around healthier materials. And so with some of the names you see on the screen, we aimed to really empower practitioners to use the guide to develop ways to address healthier materials in ways that are suitable and achievable for whatever project type or context they're working within. As Lona mentioned, we're all on a journey and at different points of that journey, and we really wanted to acknowledge that and build something that was flexible and could be tailored to given practitioners' specific needs. So today, I'll try to briefly summarize some practical guidance for moving towards healthier materials on projects, even if you have limited time and resources. And the structure of the presentation is really designed around the protocol structure. So try to give some background and context, talk about how to create a plan using the guidance outlined in the protocol, and then some tools that can support the implementation of that plan, and finally end with some links and descriptions of resources that are available. So starting with background and context, Lana got into this a little bit. Oh yeah?
We can't see your screen, Sarah.
Oh really? Have you not been able to the whole time?
Yeah.
That's great.
Okay.
That's odd.
That's okay. You gave a great intro.
I can share. Yeah, I mean, that's good, but it's not great if you can't see it. This is crazy. Okay, let me go back. It's okay because my first slides were really boring. There we go. Can you see it now?
Yeah, it's come through now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks for letting me know, because that would have been a rough slideshow without slides. So we are in this point now where if we look at this rendering of a airport terminal, these are all highlighting some potentially hazardous, some chemicals in building materials that can be potentially hazardous. And you can see it's just overwhelming. There's red everywhere. And there's lots of opportunity for improvement, which is thankfully in this project something we got to be able to do. But what we're really hoping that the industry can start to do on many of our projects. But I think a good question is kind of how we ended up here. And unfortunately, we're working within a severely limited regulatory context here in the US. So the big gray box that you see, the darkest gray, represents the number of chemicals registered in the US. And this was actually done a few years ago, so that number has grown. As you move down that list, the next largest gray box represents the percentage of chemicals that were just kind of assumed to be safe under the overarching federal chemicals regulations that were enacted through 2016. So 62,000 chemicals, or 74% of what's registered in the US, we're just like, okay, those are good to go. And then a fraction of those in the red boxes at the bottom have undergone some level of evaluation or regulation, but is really barely keeping up with the number of new chemicals that are introduced annually. So we're really in a very weak regulatory context, which is asking for the market to kind of provide a response if we want to do anything about this. So that's where we've come in. So if this timeline here from 1970s to 2020 shows federal and state regulation, you see pretty limited progress. The market has done quite a bit. So looking just within 2005 to 2016, you can see that there were a number of rating systems that started to address healthier materials. You can see that different assessment methods for how we understand and define healthier materials came online, and several different databases and resources came online. And then if we look further out into the future, in 2018, we published this protocol trying to make sense of all of that. And it's only grown since. So we do acknowledge that through momentum comes some chaos. And that's what we are facing now as practitioners. So you may have experienced or come across some of these labels, logos. It's not obvious which of these is good or bad or important for a given set of criteria that you may be trying to work toward. So that's where the work we're doing comes in. That's where the protocol comes in. So Lona touched on this, but one really strong element that is encouraged in the protocol is the idea of transparency. And this is really just a way to say, telling us what's in your products. And we're asking for that because reporting of chemical content enables us to evaluate those products. And then we can make informed selections, which then require manufacturers to come back and innovate. And that's what's really moving the industry forward, is starting with this ask for transparency, which pushes towards innovation away from dangerous chemicals. Another piece of the sort of approach of healthier materials at a high level is avoidance. So avoidance of chemicals of concern. So if you know a little bit about what's in a product, you can evaluate it and try to avoid the really nasty stuff. So that's another sort of approach. There's transparency and there's avoidance at the highest level. And I'll try to talk through a few practical examples of each of those as I talk through the sort of approach that's outlined in the protocol. So in the protocol, there's 7 steps to kind of creating and implementing a plan for healthier materials. And I'll walk through a few different ways that that can be tackled. So 2 very different examples that I'll kind of touch on throughout. One is the new terminal at SFO, Harvey Memorial Terminal 1, and the other is a youth art center in East Palo Alto. So Terminal 1 took a very much transparency-driven approach, whereas the art center in East Palo Alto was very much driven by avoiding the most hazardous chemicals of concern. And so the first step in the plan is to establish a goal and scope for healthier materials. And this can look different for different projects, and different levels of effort may be possible, and those can bring different benefits, but everything is beneficial as we all kind of make progress on the journey that we've mentioned. So maybe that first step is asking for documentation from manufacturers, sending a couple emails for a few products. You've done a step that provides a benefit. Maybe a higher effort goal would be to avoid specific chemicals of concern. That's kind of the next level. And then, really going full ambition at the far end of this would be trying to comply across the project with the Living Building Challenge Red List. So that kind of runs a spectrum of intensity, and everything on this brings a benefit. And that's important to consider when you're thinking about the goal and scope. Kind of put into practice, maybe on the first project, you're asking for some content disclosure for a number of products. You do that a couple times, it gets easier, and then maybe you're saying, okay, I'm going to require some disclosure for a few products. You do that a couple times, it gets even easier, and then you maybe highlight some worst-in-class product chemical combinations. So I really want to avoid flame retardants in foam. Maybe that's an example of something you want to tackle after getting some experience under your belt. And we're all trying to push toward this ideal where we're really doing comprehensive disclosure and avoidance requirements for the majority of products. in our projects. And I wouldn't think that anyone is quite here. Lona, maybe you disagree, but I think we're all kind of somewhere on this line. But I think ideally we could all get to this point, but I don't think anyone's there yet. So I think with both of these projects, we had pretty ambitious goals and scopes. So with SFO, we were requiring complete chemical disclosure using LEED criteria for any products within the building, so interiors and core and shell. With the East Palo Alto Arts Center, we were trying to select materials with reduced quantities of chemicals of concern, and we highlighted priority spaces to narrow the scope of that effort. And that kind of moves to the next step in the plan, which is setting priorities. And these priorities can be driven by a number of different topics or drivers. So kind of increasing from left to right with the amount of time and expertise required to establish the priorities. You could start by doing kind of quantity and location-based prioritization. So materials you're going to use a lot of, or materials that are inside the weatherproofing membrane. You could then, if you want to put a little more time and effort into that creation of those priorities, you could move into readily available guidance. So maybe referencing the Living Building Challenge Red List and trying to prioritize materials that contain those chemicals, or trying to highlight specific chemicals in specific product types. Very rarely, I've only been part of a few projects that have done the most ambitious here on the far right, where you're really digging into the chemistry of materials, but that is something you could do as well. Within SFO, when we were setting priorities, we were really driven by meeting the LEED and WELL requirements, which are just numbers of products with the right documentation, and also trying to prioritize products that didn't have a lot of available information. Because it was such a big project, we felt we could really leverage the market signal or the amount of money that was spent to encourage manufacturers to disclose content. With the Art Center, we were looking at really what the most, materials that were used in the highest quantities, and also prioritizing stuff that was wet applied on site because of the risks of exposure from those products. The next step in the plan is to agree to a target. So I've mentioned a couple times that, within LEED and other rating systems like WELL, it's really a number of products or a percentage of products that is required. And that can be the way that the target is defined. With the Living Building Challenge, it's everything in the project. And then there's other approaches you can use as well. So maybe it's the number of manufacturers that are contacted for a chemical content information, or maybe it's the number of products that were actually researched. So the goals don't have to be, tied to a given rating system. They don't need to be huge numbers in order for them to be impactful. Every step helps. So SFO was a big project with a lot of folks on the team who had familiarity with this process. So we targeted obtaining 40 material health documents. And within Palo Alto Arts Center, we had a list of chemicals and a list of products that we wanted to avoid. And in the next section, I'll get into kind of how you can identify what chemicals or what products or what kinds of documents you want to tackle. So that's kind of the next part of this is, what are the methods? What are the metrics? How do you know what's good, what's bad, what's achieving your targets? And how do you, what tools can you use to do that? So I thought, in the spirit of practicality, I would actually walk through one of those. So for this example, it's very similar to SFO. We're trying to find LEED compliant documentation, and the sort of metric we're working within is the extent to which ingredients have been disclosed. So we can use Mindful Materials, and there's a link in the slide deck to this portal to start to find materials and products that meet those LEED documentation requirements. So Mindful Materials is essentially a database that is searchable by whatever material term you want to use. So I've just input fiberglass bat insulation. You can do, anything that you may need. But one of the benefits of this platform is that you can filter on brand. You can also filter on different certifications and rating systems. I won't go into detail because, as you see, there's a large number of them. But if you go to, if you're looking to set a target that relates to LEED compliant documentation, as LEED is a well-respected green building rating system, you can filter on the LEED rating system. So that's what I've done here. And now if I click on any one of these products, let's say I want this product, I can get some more information. So I can see that there's a number of documents that relate to human health. I might not know what those documents are exactly, but I know that a credible organization like USGBC has vetted those certificates and are promoting them as valid in this context of human health. And there's some additional background information about the materials as well. So this can be a really valuable way to identify materials that comply with a given set of requirements or targets that you may set for a project. I'm going to go back to the slides. I think another really valuable tool that can help you sort of establish metrics, set targets, and develop the plan as well as carry it out is called Home Free. And this is kind of a cheat sheet made by a Healthy Building Network that's organized by product type. So you can see a number of types of products here. So drywall, countertops, etc. If you go into any one of them, you can see a spectrum within that category from red to green. So red would be like worst in class product chemical combination. So spray polyurethane foam. You can learn more about why Healthy Building Network has argued that this is something you should avoid. And there's some references that you can follow if you're very interested. And then you can progress up through the spectrum. Maybe for one project, you're able to use something in the orange section, but maybe over time, you're able to really work toward getting up into the yellows and greens, which is where you're really avoiding highest chemicals of concern, highest priority chemicals of concern. So I think that this platform is a really good one for both learning about where we find the worst in class stuff, these red ones, and helping to identify ways to improve them. So enough of that. So these kinds of tools, mindful materials and home free, are really quite helpful in informing how you develop your plan, learning more about this topic, and then also as a way to use it as a method for carrying out the plan. The last step along the way is actually tracking progress. So depending on the complexity of your targets and the criteria you're following, you may need to have a very broad or sort of resource intensive tracking method. Depending if it's a simple approach, then you might just have a simple Excel spreadsheet with some products and what's done for them. But I think tracking progress, regardless of the complexity, is really important to kind of maintain motivation over the course of the project, and also kind of by the end be able to speak to whatever was accomplished. So this was in progress. This was for another project, but you can see we did quite well in certain categories, and at that point we still had some work to do, I think because we hadn't vetted those products yet, but we still had some work to do in other categories. So whatever level of complexity, it's great to be able to keep things moving by understanding how well you're doing. So I'll just close with a couple of resources. So of course the protocol, there's actually a quick guide. So a one-pager that provides a roadmap to navigate through the protocol document, which is unfortunately for everyone quite long. So this can be quite handy if you want to kind of get a high-level view of how to use it. I mentioned the Mindful Materials portal as well as Home Free. This document here from Center for Environmental Health is a great guide for purchasing furniture that is free of worst in class chemicals. And if you want more information about this worst in class term that I keep using, I think the Green Science Policy Institute 6 Classes website has some really approachable and comprehensive information about kind of 6 classes that we know are very hazardous to human health and often appear in building materials. So I will leave it there, and maybe Lona, you can pick up where you left us.
A lot of traction. You should be asking companies if they have product take back programs. There's a lot of things that we can do as designers about how we put together our projects using mechanical connections instead of glue, choosing materials that are single types of materials instead of those that are fused together, and really thinking about how these products can fit into either technical cycles or some kind of compostable natural cycle. These are a couple of projects that we worked on, the beauty shots. I'm showing these 2 projects because both of these projects were Living Building Challenge projects where we really vetted against the Living Building Challenge red list. So these are free of red list ingredients to the point where the marketplace has the products available. I would like to put out there in the world that no project is really red list free right now. They're as red list free as they can be within the current constraints of the marketplace. There are whole product categories that don't even have any red list free options yet. So I hear that thrown out there sometimes, and just know that like there really is no red list free project yet, but that's what we're all working towards, so that we can do more and more of our buildings without these hazardous ingredients in them, and that should be the goal. These are the top 6 product disclosures that we look for within our firm. I would argue that they're pretty close to the top 6 for everybody. The declare labels and health product declarations are both forms of material ingredients disclosures that can help you look for and avoid those worst in class hazardous chemicals in your projects. Environmental product declarations is what everybody's buzzing about right now as they try to lower their embodied carbon or address climate health, as it's called in the Materials Pledge. FSC certification, still the gold standard for wood. What's interesting about this one is they are going to be adding a requirement, I think starting this year, that products that are certified also have to show that they have no slavery in their supply chain. That is a true problem with a lot of wood products coming out of certain parts of the world. So a good improvement to the FSC certification there. And Living Product Challenge and Cradle to Cradle certification are the most holistic certifications. And Cradle to Cradle is the one certification that really meaningfully starts to at least scratch the surface of all 5 areas of the Materials Pledge. There aren't a ton of products that have them, but just know that that's a really good one to look for when you can. When we're doing projects where we're trying to avoid either chemicals of concern or be below a certain embodied carbon level, it really helps to have this, which is a template email that we can send to manufacturers. We can really lay out those requirements and let the product reps and manufacturers help you do your work. Tell them what your requirements are and have them send you back only products that can meet those requirements, so that you're not choosing from a bunch of products that are never going to meet your goals. You're really narrowing it down from the beginning. And another important thing is once you've done the work to choose materials that have safer ingredients, maybe they're using a declare label to do that, maybe they're using a health product declaration, or you're setting an embodied carbon limit, it's really important to lock those requirements into your specifications. So I'm a big proponent of using Part 2 performance requirements of your specifications, and you put it right there along your ASTM standards that thou shalt have a product that's below a certain global warming potential for embodied carbon, that it's free of certain chemical ingredients, that it has the transparency disclosure documents, whatever it is that's a goal for your project. It's important to get it in the specifications if you really want to get on your project. And I just want to couch this in the bigger movement. I do want to leave a few minutes for questions, so I'm going to go through these ones pretty quickly. The good news is this all is going to get easier for all of us. because there's a lot of players out there working in this world that are really trying to get more sustainable building products available for everyone. So there's some owners that are leading, there's certification organizations that are pushing on this, there are nonprofits like Mindful Materials and Building Transparency, which is a group behind EC3. Everyone's working towards these bigger goals, and it's going to result in making this easier for everyone. There's these owners that have been leaders for a while. These owners are starting to get together. There's a Mindful Materials Owners Forum starting this year. And the real idea of that is to get everyone starting to ask for the same things and to put those things out publicly so smaller owners and others that want to adopt language can do it without trying to reinvent the wheel. And this is something I was involved in last year, the Mindful Materials Common Materials Framework. That's very exciting. It's going to take a year or two before you start to see the fruits of this labor really show up in our work. But the important thing that was done here is to take the 5 buckets of the Materials Pledge and to take all the data points, all those certifications, and really slice and dice how they support each of the goals that are really within the Materials Pledge. What is the data out there, mapping that data. And the beautiful thing about that, and you can go to Mindful Materials and dive into more of what this data is. But the beautiful thing about it is it's going to be foundation for all of us to do our work more meaningfully and easier. So there's this idea of getting that data into our workflow tools. If we have this common set of language and set of data points that we're all defining the Materials Pledge by these sorts of data points, that no matter where you work, you're using the same definitions. So if your interior team is getting samples from Material Bank, they can be filtering by parts of the Common Materials Framework. Your specifiers could be looking at it in their specifications and be using the same data points. That all of this, is kind of a powered by Intel situation. I'm hopeful that in the next few years, we're going to see powered by the Mindful Materials, Common Materials Framework really become a thing that makes all of us able to do this work a lot easier without having to do a lot of manual spreadsheets. We're still all in a lot of spreadsheets right now, but that will change. And that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Lona, for finishing that up. And I've put a number of links in the chat for people to go to. And like I said, these presentations will merge the two and post them on our website. So that's really great. We can open it up to some questions here. I have one from Jill. She asks, Sarah, could you speak to the process of wrangling, onboarding what was certainly a large and ever-changing team, so everyone knew what was going on and what they should be doing as a part of their material research? So it sounds like how to work within your office to get everyone on board, and how to, when there's a transition from one team member to the next, how do you maintain that knowledge?
Yeah, sure. And I think I answered it in a slightly different way, so it's helpful to that can lead me in a different direction. And Lona, please do chime in as well, because I know you have a lot of experience with both the project level kind of thing and the firm level implementation. So the response I typed in was more thinking about a project and how things can evolve on a project. And I think for that case, getting involved, getting this out there at the earliest stages and agreed at the earliest stages to get buy-in from everyone is really important. And then continuously reinforcing those decisions by tracking and reporting how progress is being made through against established goals. And then tailoring any information that you're giving as a form of onboarding specific to the member of the team. So, what you tell a contractor might look really different from what you tell someone in your office who's doing research. Like those are going to look very different, and that helps avoid the kind of information overload, blank stares that you get inevitably when you talk about this kind of stuff. But I think in the office environment, it actually might be kind of similar, where, sharing with the office broadly what it is you're trying to do, maybe starting with a very achievable goal to begin with. Hitting that goal, reporting out progress towards it, that will probably get some buy-in and additional interest. And you know, as interest evolves, different people might take on different roles. So how you interact or maintain momentum for those different people might involve different conversations where you're tailoring that kind of delegation in different ways. I don't know, Lana, I see you nodding. So
yeah, I mean, I think it's always a work in progress, and Jill is a former colleague of mine, so she knows about some of the things we've tried and maybe not succeeded with, lessons learned about how you do this. It does occur to me as I get more experience with this that, you know, writing it down somewhere and then putting it someplace visible to the team, so that it's easier. Yeah, having someone within the project team on the day-to-day team that's well versed in it and can be an advocate within the design team is really helpful. Trying to keep it simple, you know, maybe there's the simple one pager, and if you want to dive more into the detail, either the person who is, you know, the advocate within the team knows all the details, or, you know, there's other links to things that get more into the nitty gritty. But it feels like the translation of things is important, like what really matters. It's similar to what you do for the contractors when you translate this into spec language. You don't want to, you know, tell them the entire encyclopedia of all the background information behind this. You just need to tell them, what do they need to take action on? Do we need a health product declaration? It needs to show that it's free of red list ingredients. That's it. Like,
yeah.
I think one of the things too we've been talking about in our office is making sure that this process, you're working with the client to make these decisions, so that the client, you can maybe show them, look, we have all of these different options. Where do you want to place your focus on? It might be on like equity in the design materials chain, or it might be on reducing pollutants, or it might have, you know, local materials. There's the protocol gives all those different options that you can work with your client to select, and that really helps you hone in on those goals as well.
I also think there's been a lot of great work done by folks like Lona and others who have developed a lot of really great resources that we can use now. And so you don't need to start from scratch when you're, you know, doing that onboarding, wrangling the team, starting this up in firms. So
definitely. I had a question actually. You know, in your estimate, what are the areas in our buildings where we could have maybe the greatest impact, like the low hanging fruit, or where could we start? Like, let's say talking about pollutants, like, what do you see the areas having the most pollutants, and how, you know, we can dial that back or avoid those altogether?
yeah, I think it depends. There's definitely a place where you can start. I just wanted to step back. I love what you were saying about making sure the client is involved in the decision-making process. I have some really great friends who will talk about, you just write it in specifications, they'll never know, nobody reads it. And I think that is the opposite of the right approach to it, that you should really let everyone in, and that nobody is going out trying to make their building more dangerous to folks. And this might be a harder to pin down danger, but certainly introducing hazardous chemicals, or even contributing to climate change. These are all real dangers that we can help alleviate as we work on things. So I just wanted to make that point before I dove into the next topic. And I totally forgot the question.
Oh, it was just about like what part of the buildings do you see have, let's say, maybe the greatest amount of pollutants, or, you know, what are the low hanging fruit that you see where we could get started on?
Yeah, so the low hanging fruit isn't necessarily the place where you have the most pollutants. It's a place where we have the most information. So there are certain categories of interior and exterior products where we have a lot of information either about material ingredients or about their embodied carbon. And those are the ones we can really take action on. Carbon Leadership Forum is great for the embodied carbon part. Certainly the Healthy Building Network Home Free Spectrum that Sara shared has some really great information about where to start in making better choices. So those are two of my favorite resources right now that can just get you started on the right things. I think, you know, we'll see more and more. We're working on a project with Princeton right now where we're identifying product types, and this will become public in a couple months, that you can make healthier materials choices on and embodied carbon choices on. And really what we were trying to do on that project, which Sara and Arup are doing a lot of their projects, including one with us, is really looking at where the marketplace is right now. Where do we have enough transparency within those areas, those product types where we have enough transparency? Where can we avoid those worst in class ingredients? Where can we make much better low carbon material selections? So that information is out there, and there's going to be more and more of that information out there. Certainly one easier place to start, because you can build it into your specification, or commodity materials like gypsum board and even your paint systems and stuff that, you know, the design team doesn't care about. They're not gonna mess it up by choosing a basis of design product that doesn't meet that, because that can just be baked into your template specifications.
Sounds good.
I would also just add that it also depends, the low-hanging fruit depends on what the action is. So we have a lot of the information for some product categories because a lot of people have asked a lot of questions and asked for transparency. So it can be really low-hanging fruit to reach out and ask for things. And that is making progress and supporting movement toward more information for more categories.
Yeah, that's so right. We're asking for transparency, asking for better materials creates those places where it's easy and low-hanging fruit. Like carpet always comes to mind because people have been asking those questions for a long time at this point. So now you can get both free of worthless ingredients and very low carbon carpet that are the same products and have competition. Like 3 manufacturers can meet those as long as you set the limits the right level for the embodied carbon part.
Right. Okay. Super.
Can I ask one more thing? Sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
I was just going to say also low hanging fruit for across the 5 elements of the pledge is what you don't include. So if you can reduce the amount of material you're using, if you can simplify the design to reduce, then you've hit them all.
That's great. Well, we just had that one question, and I really appreciate everyone being here. We're looking to have this series be our kickoff and look to showcase healthy materials throughout the rest of the year. We're looking to have a conversation locally at Granite Rock in Seaside, California, talking about low carbon options for specifying concrete. So as we know, that's a big one on our carbon emissions. So while we can't omit it completely, we can certainly reduce the concrete in our projects and looking to make those a lower concrete formula. So stay tuned for that one. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll talk another time. Bye.
Thanks so much,
Bye.
Libby.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.